Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Cromash. Welcome to today's Libby Lecture. We are delighted to welcome back Michele Nichols, our favorite astro educator, to talk to us all about the International Space Station. Let me just make a couple of announcements and then we'll get right to Michele's presentation. I want to thank the Levy Senior Center Foundation for sponsoring the lectures. We would not be able to provide these interesting programs to you without their support. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who contributed to sending in a gift around the holiday time to support the webinars and to support the Levy Senior Center Foundation. We appreciate that so much. I also wanted to remind everyone, we have these 100% cotton long sleeve t-shirts promoting the Levy Senior Center Foundation. They're super comfortable. I have them in large and extra large. They're great for pajamas. So unisex, please contact me if you would like one. They're $15 a piece and I will deliver them personally. That's pretty much it. Michele is, she is both a science guru and a teacher, and she has a background in education, and she's working at the only place she has ever held a job, which is the Adler Planetarium. Michele, take it away.
Well, I did have a couple of other jobs prior to that, but for my professional career, yes, it's been at the Adler Planetarium, yes. So hello everybody, and hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, and staying warm this time of year. It is quite chilly out, so I'm glad we could be together virtually. So my name is Michele Nichols, and I work at the Adler Planetarium. And I've been there for close to 27 years. It's a lot of fun, and so I hope y'all can start to come back and visit us when we reopen to the public on March 4th. So there'll be more information coming out about that over the next few weeks, so be on the lookout. We can't wait to see everyone in person again. So what I'm going to talk about today, though, is the International Space Station. And it's something that Wendy and I were talking about earlier. It's one of those things that you forget it from time to time, that you forget that there is this very large station sailing above our heads several hundred miles up. And that it has been continuously inhabited, not by the same people throughout that time, but continuously inhabited since I believe the year 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. So we've had people in space for that entire time, more than 20 years. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about what the space station is, some of the science research that happens, how people live up in space. Yes, I will talk about how they eat in space. Yes, I will talk about how they go to the bathroom in space. Yes, I will talk about how they sleep in space, because we all do that stuff. And so everyone wants to know how you do that in space. Short answer is pretty much how you do it on Earth, but we'll talk about that. So when we get started, I'm going to share my screen. Give me just a second. All right. All right. So probably didn't expect to see a picture that looks like this, but this is what we think is the first known depiction of a space station. This is from a book by Edward Everett Hale. It came out in the year 1869, and it's called The Brick Moon. Basically something constructed by people up in space using popular building materials at the time, which were bricks. So it makes sense if you think of it that way, in terms of why in the world would they use bricks? That's not very practical. Well, it was a common building material, so that's what people were familiar with. But as far long ago as about 150 years ago, people were depicting artificially built structures in space. In 1896, Russian scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky designed a revolving space station, complete with solar panels. So a way to use the sun to generate electricity. This is kind of starting to look sort of like what you would imagine a space station might look like. But again, this was 1896. This was 125 years ago. But ever since then, people have been thinking more and more about how people would be able to successfully live in space for long periods of time. It's one thing to go up, go around the Earth a few times and come back. It's another to go up, live there for a while, stay there for a while. And by a while, I don't just mean days or weeks, I mean months or many months. In 1928, Hermann Potočnik designed a detailed space station, basically the first architecture in space. He conceived of a permanent human presence in space. He conceived of using orbiting spacecraft for doing detailed observation of the Earth, both for peaceful and for military purposes. He described how the conditions of space itself could be useful for different scientific experiments. Again, this was 1928. What you're seeing is basically people living on the outer edge of a revolving space station. And the revolving station would essentially generate its own artificial gravity through the centrifugal force of the actual rotation. And then as you got closer to the middle, you would experience less and less of that gravitational interaction. So you'll see a name on the right-hand side of the screen, and that's von Braun, and that refers to Werner von Braun. And he was the originator of the German rocket program. He and several hundred German rocket scientists and folks associated with that program came to the United States after World War II. And Werner von Braun was one of the key architects of the American space program, especially the rocket that eventually took our astronauts to the moon. But he was also a big proponent of people living in space for long periods of time. He didn't just want people to go to the moon and come back and that was it. He had long-term plans of people going to and from low Earth orbit, people going to and from the moon, people going to and from Mars, people living in space for long periods of time. This is a depiction of a space station that he had. Again, looks quite familiar after you see Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Hermann Potočnik's designs. Using that circular, that revolving space station was a pretty popular idea. And if all that looks familiar because of 2001: A Space Odyssey, well, that's no coincidence. It's interesting. Physics works the way it does, and so you take advantage of that. And so if you're going to come up with a space station that makes that sort of simulates a gravitational field through rotation, you're going to come up with a round space station in terms of being able to do that. Well, these were all depictions of space stations, or in this case, a movie depiction of a space station. How about real space stations? Well, early space stations, so people living in space for longer periods of time. The first space station that was put up in space was done by the Soviet Union. This was Salyut 1 in 1971. And it consisted of essentially a long module. You'll see kind of a picture there on the left. Of course, we don't have great pictures of this thing, but there's a depiction of it there on the right-hand side. The object that's farthest to the right is the spacecraft that you would use to get to and from the space station itself. Here is a better depiction here. It essentially was a long tube, and you would enter through one end, and you would have your living quarters, your working quarters, and all of that. So it was essentially a contained space that you would live on for a while. Salyut 3 followed a few years later. Salyut 4, a little bit after that. a little bit bigger, a little bit more complicated. You'll see solar panels there on the exterior of that one. So that's this part right here. Solute 5, I could not find an actual photograph of anything related to Solute 5, but I found a very simple drawing. Solute 6, again, getting a little bit bigger, a little more complicated, and then Solute 7. So all of this was essentially the Soviet Union putting up bigger stations, more elaborate stations, doing more things with them as they were able to learn more. And over the course of about 20 years, they were able to do an extraordinary number of things with and learn an extraordinary number of things with what they did. They went from monolithic to modular, meaning you could not just send up one tube and that would be the tube that you live in. Modular means you would put pieces together over time. Multiple docking ports, so you could have more than one spacecraft going to and from the space station in space. Supplying the space station by the use of other spacecraft that would just carry up stuff. So clothing, food, water, all that stuff. Handing over from one crew to the next. So one crew would already be up there, the next crew would come up, they would enter the station, the other crew would leave and take the same spacecraft or a different one back down to Earth. And then finally coming up with experiments to do up in space for a long period of time. So not just a few hours worth, but a few days, weeks, months worth of time. And so this is something that was really important to, believe it or not, the United States and in the International Space Station several years later. I'll get to that in just a sec. The United States had an initial space station. Ours was more monolithic. It was called Skylab. And Skylab was built from the upper stage of a Saturn rocket. And you can see Skylab here. If it looks a little bit wonky, if you say, well, wait a minute, there's a solar panel on this side, why not on that side? What is this strange looking blanket thing? When Skylab launched, unfortunately, one of the solar panels was ripped off during the process of launch, and the heat shield was ripped off as well. And so the very first thing astronauts had to do when they got up into space was release the second solar panel that had been pinned to the side of the station, and then also attach a blanket that would shield the station from the sun. And so the first thing they had to do was do all that to make the station even inhabitable in the first place. Otherwise, Skylab would have been a failure right from the beginning. But it was up for several years. There were 3 crews that went up, Skylab 1, 2, and 3. The first crew was up for a month. The second crew was up for 2 months. The third crew is up for 3 months. This is the interior of Skylab. And it kind of looks like a mess, if you ask me. One kind of interesting thing that you'll see in the Solute space stations, especially, is you have a definite sense of what up and down is. To the human brain, that's kind of important, especially for visual up and down. When you're up in space, you don't have gravity pulling on your inner ear telling you which way up or down is. And so you could turn your head, you could turn your whole body completely upside down and it feels the same to you whether you're up or down. So if you have other visual cues around you telling you what is up and down, that helps a lot with your balance, with your with not feeling sick while you're up there. This was a little hard for some of the Skylab astronauts to get used to, because there was kind of stuff everywhere on the inside of the station, but there was a lot of space for sure. If anyone has ever visited the Air and Space Museum, you'll see a depiction, kind of a walk-in version of Skylab that you can see there. Not the actual Skylab. I'll talk about what happened to that in just a sec. But there was more than just living in space that happened. There were science experiments. In this case, there was a solar telescope on the exterior of Skylab, and so we could keep an eye on the sun and get some really interesting depictions of the sun using wavelengths that we cannot see from the ground because our atmosphere absorbs certain wavelengths of light. And so we were able to see the sun as we had never really seen it before over longer periods of time. Then there was a lot of other stuff that was done on the Skylab mission. Well, it was expected that Skylab would last for a lot longer than it did. And there was supposed to have been a boost mission to try to get the station up higher in a higher orbit so it could last longer. Notice on the lower left of this drawing, that is the space shuttle. It was anticipated that that Skylab would still be flying by the time the space shuttle started launching. Well, there was a delay in between when the space shuttle started launching in 1981 and when Skylab unfortunately was experiencing a bit more drag from the Earth's upper atmosphere. And its orbit got lower and lower, and then eventually it fell into Earth's atmosphere. They didn't get the space shuttle flying soon enough to be able to boost Skylab to a higher orbit to make it last longer. So where did it land? Well, some of it landed in Australia. This is one of the fragments of the station. It showed just how much of the station could actually survive going into the Earth's atmosphere. A lot of it burned up, some of it didn't. And so there was a portion of a town that was hit by some of the debris. No one was hurt, but the town kind of playfully sent NASA a a bill for littering the town with Skylab fragments. Anyway, good naturedly, of course. Well, a few years later, the Soviet Union sent up the Mir space station. Mir means peace in Russian. And so it started flying in 1986. And this was definitely a modular space station. This was the early version of Mir. And this was the latter version of Mir. And they just kept adding on and adding on. Not only that, at about this time, or the late 80s, early 90s, is when the United States was considering putting up a new space station. The original name was Space Station Freedom. It was supposed to have been a US only mission until folks started calculating the cost of building such a thing. And then we realized, it would be a lot better if we got other countries involved in this so they could shoulder some of the cost. So that's where the international part of International Space Station came about. We only had experience with one space station, that was Skylab, and it didn't exist anymore. So in order to gain experience with living in space for long periods of time, constructing an on-orbit station, meaning taking up pieces and putting them up piece by piece, in order to do all of that, docking with a space station, with the space shuttle, none of this we had ever done before. And so we started partnering with the Russians to get American astronauts on board the Mir space station. And when they did do that, they lived on board the Spectre module. So that was the name of that circled module right there. Now, Mir was a bit of a mess. I want you to just take a quick look at what a potential problem is in this picture. If you have a modular station and you have wiring that goes through, doors, ports, and all of that, let's say you have a problem on board one of those portions of the space station. How do you close a door? This actually did happen. There was a fire aboard Mir. And fire does not exactly operate in space the way it does on Earth, and it was dangerous there for a while. They had to essentially cut a bunch of cabling and stuff to be able to close the doors so that the cosmonauts and astronauts would survive the fire, and they did. But it showed, gee, maybe we don't want to do this in a future space station concept. So live and learn. But this is one of the cosmonauts on board Mir. So definitely a lot going on there. Yes, space stations get messy from time to time, but it was a really great way for the United States to gain experience that we didn't have previously. We had the space shuttle first dock with Mir in 1995. So you'll see we've got Mir looking at the space shuttle, and we've got the space shuttle looking at Mir. People who lived through the Cold War, I'm sure, never thought, even just a few years after the end of the Cold War, that we would be docking an American space shuttle with a Russian space station. And I love this picture because you just kind of see the cosmonaut there in the window. He's kind of looking like, hi guys, welcome to the neighborhood. So anyway, yes, he's looking out a window. Know that he is not just looking out an open door. That is impossible. But anyway, I love this picture. Well, 1998 is when we first started constructing the International Space Station. The International Space Station is composed of quite a few different modules, partly built by the United States for some of them. Some were built by Russia, and they were supposed to have been there was supposed to have been a Mir 2 space station. So they took what they built for Mir 2 but hadn't yet launched and repurposed it to use for instead in the International Space Station. We've also got the European Space Agency, Japan, Canada, so quite a few countries involved. The first two modules to go up were Zarya, which is the module on the left side of this image, and Unity. So Zarya is a Russian module. Unity is an American module. Unity is on the right, and they were docked together. So Zarya went up first, Unity came up next, and so we get those together in space, and then slowly over the course of about 13 years, we built the International Space Station. Here is the full look at it in its basically completed form. What I like to tell people, remind people is, if this is the only thing you remember from this talk, I'll be okay with it. The International Space Station was constructed once. All of these modules were never put together on the ground together as one piece. That's impossible to do. They were constructed in space the first time. It's not like you got a second chance if something didn't fit, if something didn't work, one piece didn't fit together with another piece. It's not like you could kind of wedge it together. Couldn't do that. This thing was built the first time over the course of 13 years. Pretty amazing that it all fit together and it all worked properly. Shows you how cool physics and engineering is. Here's another view of it right here. And the United States pieces were brought up via the space shuttle, and there were other pieces as well. So you can see the solar panels. They generate electricity from the sun, and they basically contract the sun. And the space station can generate more electricity than it needs. Basically, if something goes wrong with a solar panel, you've got some backup. This is Zarya, and yes, it's kind of a mess. But basically, think of it this way. You're probably going, wow, they got everything all over the floor. Well, you're floating. You don't need a floor. You don't need to walk on the floor. It doesn't matter if there's stuff strapped down to what might be your floor. You don't need it. And so you can use handholds. You can make your way across, and so you can, as long as you know where everything is. That is actually a really important part about life on station, which is keeping track of where everything is. The entire volume of the International Space Station, if you add up the interior volume of all the modules, it comes out to about the same volume as an empty 747 plane. So quite large, but still confined, and lots of storage, lots of Velcro, lots of straps, lots of handholds. This is the interior of the Unity module. Unity serves as a connecting passageway between elements of the space station. That name Unity was picked purposely, because resources are routed through your Unity for distribution to the various modules that are attached to it. So Unity is a way to plug different modules together. So you don't plug those modules to each other, you plug them into something like Unity as a connecting node between all of those pieces. This is one of the Russian cosmonauts. He's taking a little break, playing a little basketball. You can see his little basketball there at the top. Here's his basketball net there over on the left. So playing a little mini ball in Unity. Well, basketball doesn't work the same way than it does up in space. You would throw the ball up on Earth and it arcs and comes back down. Basketball up in space, you got to toss a ball to have it hit something in order to eventually make it through a net. I would say it's probably a lot harder to play space basketball than it is to play Earth ground-based basketball. You're probably going, wait a minute, they're wasting time. They're playing games. Well, these people are up for weeks, if not months, if not many months. The longest period of time someone has been up on the International Space Station has been close to a year. And so can anyone work nonstop for an entire year? And the answer, of course, is no. So you're gonna find time to play and wind down from time to time. So this is an example of that. This is Zvezda, and Zvezda is Russian. It means star. These are crew member living accommodations for the Russian crew. There are always Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts, and just the number of each of those differs. And then there are other astronauts who come up from other countries as well, some of the partner countries. So you'll get, for example, 2 Russians, 1 American, 2 Americans, 1 Russian, 2 and 2, or whatever. You'll have crew totals at least 6, if not 7 or more. So it can eventually get a little crowded up there, but Zvezda is the Russian crew members' living quarters. They include sleeping quarters, toilet facilities, a galley with a refrigerator and a freezer, hot and cold water dispensers, hot plates to warm your food up, and a table to secure your food onto while you're eating. This module has a total of 14 windows in it, including 3 windows that are 9 inches in diameter. And the reason you need those is when you have a spacecraft coming up to dock with the space station, you need to be able to look out the window and make sure that nothing is going wrong, especially if it is an unmanned vehicle coming to bring up supplies. You need to be able to take control of that remotely in case it looks like something is about to crash into the space station. So those windows are very important. There are exercise facilities on board the station. There's a NASA provided treadmill, a stationary bike, and other ways to exercise. The astronauts and cosmonauts have their own sleep stations. This is one of the cosmonaut sleep stations in the Zvezda module. So this is one of the cosmonauts using a computer in his sleep station. So it may not look like a large amount of room, but remember, you don't just have 2-dimensional amount of room, you have 3-dimensional amount of room. And it doesn't matter if your sleeping bag is on the wall or the floor or the ceiling. You don't have a sense of up or down, except for what your eyes are telling you. So it doesn't matter where exactly you are sleeping and what part of the wall you're attached to. In a microgravity environment, the body loses bone mass and muscle mass over time. So to try to counter as much of that loss as possible, crew members need to exercise daily. And Zvezda has the treadmill and the bike from NASA. In order to use the treadmill, crew members need to strap themselves onto the devices and the stationary bike too, to prevent them from floating away. Because if you have your feet on the treadmill, as soon as you press down with your foot, you're going up in the opposite direction. Although, did anyone ever tell astronauts they should not run with scissors? See, part of me thinks that was a bad idea. But anyway, notice the vast amount of tape that's located on the space station. There is plenty of tape, and yes, There is duct tape up on the space station as we speak. It is a very popular fastener up on the space station. Lots of tape, lots of Velcro. Crew members get 1 pair of shorts and a t-shirt for every 3 days of exercising. And their work shirts and their work pants or work shorts are changed about once every 10 days. They change their underwear and socks every other day. Socks need to last a month. They also get sweaters, running shoes to use when they're exercising. The pants that they wear have lots of Velcro and ways to store things in pockets, especially if they can close the pockets. The pockets and the Velcro help keep everything near you. Otherwise, yes, you can let something float next to you, but there are enough air currents inside the space station to move air from one part to the next. If you put a pencil or a pen or a piece of paper or something next to you floated in space and you look away, a little while later when you go back to it, it might not be there because the air currents may have taken it away to someplace else. When a piece of clothing has been worn as many times as is necessary, they discard it. Clothes are not washed in order to save on water. And so what they'll do is they will put the clothing into a spacecraft that is then going to, the garbage, essentially that entire spacecraft is going to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. And if anything makes it down to the surface, if it does, it will splash down in the water. So very little clothing is brought back to Earth. Most of the clothing is destroyed because you need water for drinking and keeping astronauts alive. You don't need it for washing clothing. Destiny is the US National Lab. It's the main workspace. In a typical workday, crew members get to spend about an hour and a half preparing and eating their meals, 8 to 8.5 hours sleeping, and then 14 hours exercising and working. Working involves not only doing experiments, but maintaining the space station, inspecting and fixing equipment, repairing things, cleaning. Cleaning is really important because you are stuck in these tubes for weeks or months. And so you need to make sure everything is cleaned and everything is kept track of because you don't want to lose anything. There are a lot of experiments that are done to date. There have been more than 3,000 experiments that have been done on the International Space Station. I'll talk more about some of the examples of that in just a little bit. Quest is an airlock, and this is what astronauts use to get into and out of the station if they're doing spacewalks. What you do is you get yourself into your spacesuit and you get everything all situated. You go inside the airlock, you close the interior door, you then let the air out of the Quest airlock, and then you can go out into space. And so they do these spacewalks to go maintain portions of the station from time to time. Yes, they do get to take up personal items. This is astronaut Frank Culbertson. He decided that one of his personal items was he was going to take his trumpet. And so he was doing this in the Quest airlock. Astronauts are allowed to bring a certain amount of personal items to space. They need to conform to size and mass requirements. But other than that, and making sure that whatever it is isn't dangerous, they can kind of bring up whatever they want. Within limits, of course. You can't bring up literally everything because every single ounce you bring up costs money to be able to lift it up into space. And so you're only allowed a certain amount of stuff to be able to bring up. But he decided to use one of his personal items as his trumpet. Here we've got Harmony and Tranquility. These are also for routing resources from one place to the other. Harmony is on the right, Tranquility is on the left. Also for life support. And notice this piece over here. It doesn't look like much until you look on the inside. This is the cupola. And so what you see in this picture is the cupola with the windows closed or with the windows covered. And this is a cupola with the windows uncovered. The cupola it has the largest window ever flown on orbit, which is 31.5 inches in diameter. This is a special kind of glass. It's very clear. The windows are protected by shutters, but the astronauts love to spend time in the cupola because they can stare down at Earth for long periods of time. The shutters, when they're closed, are closed to protect the glass from micrometeoroids and orbital debris, and to prevent solar radiation from heating the cupola, or conversely, to avoid losing heat from inside out into space. So they don't have the windows open all the time, but they do have them open from time to time, so the astronauts could go hang out, take pictures, and just look out the window at how really pretty the ground is from space. This is the European Space Agency laboratory. It's called Columbus. And here is one of the European Space Agency astronauts doing his thing. Different experiments and things are done here as well. Canada plays an important part in the space station, just like Canada played a very important part in the space shuttle. The robotic arm of the space shuttle was built and provided by Canada, and it's called the Canadarm. The robotic arm on the space station is even more maneuverable and flexible, and it is called Canadarm2. The part at the end is called Dexter. Think of Dexter as a robotic multi-tool. Different ways to bring different equipment and materials to certain parts of the space station. So this Canadarm can be repositioned to a variety of locations outside the space station to provide maximum flexibility to doing stuff outside. There is a Japanese pressurized laboratory called Kibo, and there's also a non-pressurized, so an exterior portion where you can do experiments inside. You can have experiments hanging on to the exterior outside. And again, that is Kibo, provided by Japan. All right. Everyone wants to know, how do you eat in space? Just like you eat on Earth. Your process of eating works exactly the same. Your gastrointestinal system works exactly the same. The food on the space station is mainly frozen, dehydrated, or heat stabilized. Drinks are usually dehydrated. Everybody eats off of trays, and you'll have different ways of strapping your food down, either through Velcro or straps. But you'll see some fresh food here. So when they bring up a spacecraft with supplies, the first thing that you'll notice when you open the door of the space station to get access to that spacecraft with the supply is the overwhelming smell of fresh food, especially tomatoes, apples, that sort of thing. And they'll usually eat fresh food first because you want to eat all that stuff before it goes bad. So you'll also see we've got pouches, we've got canisters, we've got cans, we've got tubes. What I'm seeing here is a combination in this picture of American food and Russian food. Americans tend to send up plastic containers. Russians tend to send up tubes and cans. You'll see scissors as part of your normal kit for eating, because scissors are needed to open the plastic containers. And you'll see spoons and more like spoonula sorts of things. The food is going to be relatively sticky, whatever it is, because you don't want little crumbly things floating away. You want your food to stick to your fork or spoon or whatever it is that you've got. Yes, that is probably a bottle of barbecue sauce. Yes, that is a bottle of Sriracha. So stuff like that is really, really important. When you go up into space, your taste buds aren't as vibrant as they are on Earth. And so you need to spice up, you need to season your food more than you normally do on Earth. And so things like hot sauce, barbecue sauce, Sriracha, all of that is really important for livening up astronaut food. Also, these little bottles that are over here on the left hand side, you'll get other ways to season your food. You'll have pepper, which is actually pepper oil. If you've ever tried to mix pepper and water, you know that they don't mix. The pepper just floats on top of the water. So it's pepper oil. and salt water. Why not just salt? Well, if you shake salt, you're going to shake your salt everywhere. At least with salt in water and pepper in oil, you can squirt it into your little food container and it will likely stick to your food. So you need to be mindful of all of that. And behind them is also the galley. This is where they can add hot water or cold water to their food, what temperature it's supposed to be at. The food containers have all that information on the outside about how long to heat the food, what kind of water to put in it if it's dehydrated, what type of water, what temperature, how long to let it sit for. All those instructions are usually on the food containers. You can see astronauts enjoying meals together quite a lot. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of swapping of food. Actually, I know there's a lot of swapping of food. One popular food item to swap is tortillas. You can do an awful lot with a tortilla. You can make a sandwich out of it. You can make a pizza out of it. You can roll things up. You can make a burrito out of it. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with food. And again, you're up there for weeks, if not months, if not many months at a time. You might need to liven your food up from time to time. And yes, they really do play with their food. This is one of the cosmonauts shaving in the Zvezda service module. You can see his sleeping bag behind him over here on, or a sleeping bag on the right-hand side. Oh, I think I just noticed for the first time there's an apple over here on the left-hand side. Somebody was obviously saving that for later. Don't really have to do an awful lot to your hair. You probably don't want to because they're not being in a microgravity environment. It's going to kind of do what it's going to do. But each crew member has a hygiene kit, toothbrush, toothpaste, basic toiletries. There are no showers on the space station. You do sponge bath. Again, squirting water, they found this out on Mir and Skylab. Squirting water is a bad idea because you have to then go chase the little water droplets all over the place. So that is not necessary up in space. So squirting a little bit of water onto a washcloth and wiping yourself down every now and then is all you need to do. You can see one of the sleeping bags being used. You can see Peggy Whitson there getting her hair cut there on the left-hand side. So what Peggy is holding is a tube to collect. It's kind of like a vacuum. It's to collect the freshly cut hair, which floats freely. You don't want little bits of hair to float freely all over the place. This is astronaut Dan Tani. He is originally from the Downers Grove area. So that is him just hanging out in his sleeping bag. These are the different modules where the astronauts can go sleep. And yes, they're on the floor, the wall, the ceiling. No worry about up or down, so they can be anywhere. I just want to breeze through a few of these pictures. Just wanted to show you them hanging out on the outside of the space station doing maintenance. So this is a maintenance session here. Here we've got them making their way down the length of the station. So the different modules are attached to some of these truss pieces, and you have to be really careful. You got to make sure you are attached at all times because going and getting you is kind of hard if you happen to become detached. So you want to make sure you stay attached to the station at all times. And no, we have not lost anyone out into space. All right, y'all wanted to know, how do you go to the bathroom in space? The answer is just like you do on Earth. So this is the Zvezda toilet. It is the same design that was used on the Mir space station. This is the female toilet configuration. It basically resembles toilets on Earth, whereas toilets on Earth use gravity to function. Toilets in space use moving air and suction. So there are tubes and different funnels depending on if you have male anatomy or female anatomy. And basically everything else works the same. So in order to use the various pieces, you may have to hold yourself down as in footholds. You can see them on the bottom of the picture right here. So yes, you have to hold yourself down, position yourself well, because if you don't, you then have to go chasing little bits and pieces of stuff around the space station. So you want to make sure that you securely attach yourself to the toilet. I think you all now have an image in your head, and you're all exactly right. That's exactly how it all works. So there you go. I give the people what they want. All right. Water does come up from time to time. This is one of the cosmonauts cataloging water canisters. Water is extremely important. Without it, astronauts will not survive. But we now have a system on board. Now, this is a picture taken on Earth, but this is the system that was sent up into space to do water reclamation. So recycling of water, recycling of human urine, and they're able to recycle up to about 94% of the water. And with this unit right here, they've gotten that up to 98%. And if you're wondering why do we need to do that, well, sending up water is expensive, and it has weight and mass. And so if you can recycle as much of that as you possibly can, that's even better. But also long duration space flights far from Earth, you're going to need to recycle all your water because you won't have a way of replenishing your water. So this is also an experiment for future long-term spaceflight. We get to and from the space station a variety of ways. The Russians and a few other countries come up via the Soyuz spacecraft. Americans come up using the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. This is the Dragon cargo spacecraft. This is the Cygnus cargo spacecraft. It's built by Orbital Sciences Corporation. It's a US craft. This is the Dragon 2 spacecraft. This is the one that can carry people. And then at some point, this one will be carrying people up to the space station. This is the Boeing Starliner. Its next test is scheduled for no earlier than May of this year. Its first test was unsuccessful. Nothing happened. There were no people aboard it. It just didn't reach the orbit it was supposed to. It did land successfully, so that was good. But they need to do another test without people in order for NASA to then certify that it can be allowed to carry people in space. All right. Research, probably wondering, what the heck are we doing up there? What have we been doing for 20 years? Well, a lot of science. I mentioned before, more than 3,000 experiments have been conducted aboard the International Space Station during the 21 years that humans have been living up there. And these experiments help provide insight not only to living and working in space, but living and working in space for long periods of time, and improving life on Earth, and then eventually exploring farther in the solar system. There have been thousands of scientific publications that have come out of space station research. And I just want to touch on a few of these. There's no way I could talk about all of it, but people want to know what some of the interesting stuff is. This is concrete. They've explored how concrete works in space. This test involved using simulated lunar soil. So rock on Earth that's been pulverized that matches lunar soil materials as much as we possibly can. So material from Earth that emulates the properties of material from the moon. Now, previously, this material has been used to create metals and glass and cement on Earth to see, could it be used at all for that sort of stuff? Now, this experiment right here was examining whether we could create concrete in space using the same material. So the picture on the bottom is concrete, a microscope image of concrete made on Earth. The picture on the top is concrete made in space. Notice the two don't look similar. So up in space, you get more little tiny air pockets. And so this and the material is more evenly distributed in the concrete made in space. This can affect its structural integrity. Why do we care about this? Well, eventually we're going to create structures on the moon using material that's on the moon. We want to know how concrete works in a lower gravity environment. We want to see if it can be feasible to use lunar dust as a material for building lunar bases. And they've also tried to see what happens on the chemical reactions that happen when you mix cement in space. So the stuff that was created in space had more trapped air, longer lines of materials, affects the strength. And they've also tried to use this material to see if they can use 3D printers to 3D print structures on the moon. So you send the 3D printer to the moon or to Mars. It uses the dust that's already there to then create building materials with very little waste, to then create structures that then humans could then move into, essentially. So this is all really interesting stuff. Canadarm is the robotic arm. Neuroarm is the earthbound version of that. This is a robotic arm using the technology of Canadarm. A robotic arm was then created later that is then used by neuroscientists. In this case, what you're seeing is a neurosurgeon removing an egg-sized tumor from a woman's brain using a robotic arm created using Canadarm technology. Pretty amazing to think about. I mentioned water purification, very important for long duration space flight, but also you can use that same technology on Earth. Water purification in space, having a self-contained water purifier can help places that have very little access to replenished clean water. If you can recycle the water as much as possible, that can help remote areas that don't have access to that sort of system. Solar power. NASA excels at creating spacecraft using solar power. That solar power is now used on Earth. Here's an example, a solar powered refrigerator. You've got solar powered fridge and other stuff up in space. This is a solar powered fridge being used at a clinic in rural Kenya. Why is that important? I'll answer that question in just a second. This particular next thing I'm going to say is highly important given our experiences of the last 2 years. Refrigerators are important for storing vaccines in areas where batteries can be costly and wasteful. So having a solar powered fridge or freezer for storing vaccines in areas that do not have that out in the middle of nowhere. So how important this slide I've had in this talk for several years, but it's only been in the last couple of years that we really realize how important vaccines are. I mentioned astronauts and cosmonauts experience muscle loss and bone loss over time, even with exercising up to 2 hours a day and doing different kinds of exercises. They still have this happen. And investigators have found significant reduction of bone mineral density happens. And so trying to figure out how this happens in space at an accelerated rate can help researchers as they're trying to help prevent osteoporosis in people on the ground, because it happens at a much slower pace, but especially with older folks. And so trying to restore bone loss due to being up in space, trying to restore bone loss due to osteoporosis on Earth. And so this has a direct connection to all of that. Ground research has indicated that certain bacteria, in particular salmonella, might become salmonella can become more nasty up in space than it is on Earth. If you figure out how it becomes more nasty up in space, you can figure out how to make it become less nasty. And so if you know what turns it on up in space, you can turn that off on Earth. So they have identified the genetic pathway that activates in salmonella bacteria. And it increases the likelihood that it spreads in microgravity. So if you figure out what turns it on, you can figure out what turns it off, and then help people on Earth who are affected by terrible pathogens like salmonella. We've grown a lot of stuff in space. Space zucchini, at least for zucchini flowers. You've got space veggies in the veggie experiment. You've got space lettuce. This is the first lettuce grown and eaten in space. You've got space flowers. You've got space zinnias specifically. Why flowers? Because they are plants that can go from seed to seed. Seed, plant, flower, seed. And so getting that growth life cycle in space is very important to see how that works. Because if we have long duration space flights elsewhere, we're going to conceivably have to have astronauts grow food in order to consume it. Well, seeing the entire life cycle from a flower is important to be able to do that. But also, flowers are important just to get some color on the space station. It's actually good for an astronaut's well-being to grow and tend to plants. This is a new one, it's called Veggie Ponds. Pond stands for something, and I don't remember what it stands for, but that's not important. But the important part of this is ponds is a passive nutrient delivery system for plants, meaning the actual nutrient delivery system does not use electricity. And so that's important, again, for long duration spaceflight where your electricity is contained. You only have so much, you can't get more, you can't just plug stuff into the wall. And so having ways to passively grow food is very important. On future deep space missions, astronauts could use this system to grow fresh veggies to supplement their diet of packaged food. This is a 3D printed multi-tool. It was designed by a college student. It was 3D printed in space. You don't necessarily have to anticipate every single tool that you're going to need in space. This proved that you could 3D print a multi-tool that could then be used in space to fix different things that might go wrong. So you send up the raw materials and the 3D printer, and you can print what you need. Pretty neat. And then people want to know what happens to astronauts when you're up in space for a long period of time. These two folks, astronaut Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, were sent up for almost a year. And so figuring out what happens to the human body for a long period of time was really important. If you want to get into what actually happened, just let me know. But I'll give you just a quick little rundown. Astronauts experience vision changes while they're in space. So they wanted to investigate that. These two guys grew about 2 inches when they were in space. Not that they grew, it's that there wasn't gravity pulling on their spines, compressing their spines, which means they lengthened by about 2 inches, which means they compressed by 2 inches as soon as they came back. Can you imagine how much that hurt? And so what they wanted to see is if the experiences that these guys had for a long period of time were due to space flight and how we could counteract some of these things in the future. Scott Kelly got a flu shot while he was up in space. The immune system can be far less effective in space than it is on Earth. And so being able to investigate that was important. These guys are basically human guinea pigs. When they go up there, they're involved in a lot of human biological research. But this was Scott Kelly being helped out of his spacecraft when he came back. So finally, this is Chicago from space. Looks pretty cool. So if you have questions, I would love to get to your questions. So Wendy, do you want to feed me questions?
Absolutely. That was so fascinating. We have a lot of good questions.
Excellent.
Okay. Richard would like to know, how much Russian do the Americans speak and how much English do the Russians speak?
Both, quite a bit, because one of the main space station control rooms is in Russia. And so they definitely have to speak, they have to learn some amount of Russian to be able to speak with the controllers in Russia on the ground. And then the Russian cosmonauts also learn English to be able to speak with their compatriots while they're up there. So yes, you definitely have to know more than just your average where's the bathroom conversational Russian. So you got to kind of have to know some more technical side of it as well. There's a lot of training that happens not only here in the US, but also in Russia to be able to then go up to the space station.
I was unaware how closely the different countries work together on the different space station, especially it seems like the lead participants have been the United States and Russia.
Correct.
Which is an ideal version of an intercountry relationship as opposed to what is going on currently.
Yep.
And could on the ground tensions impact what happens?
They could, but think of it this way. The space station has been operating for more than 20 years, and there have been various tensions at various times during that entire time, and they've still kept it going. It's rather interesting that the political side of things, there might be tensions there, but the science side still goes. It shows you that this cooperation really can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of the political stuff is posturing, getting what you want from your opponent. Whereas the science side, they just want to keep them alive. They just want to keep bad things from happening to them.
Are the preliminary steps in finding the best candidates, are they similar in Russia? Are they as comprehensive?
I would guess so. I honestly don't know, but I would imagine yes. You don't want to send up someone who is going to flip out in a short period of time. That kind of has happened in the past, more in the distant past, like space shuttle era, like 1980s space shuttle era.
Can you elaborate a little?
Without going into a whole lot of detail, let's just say that some people handle being up in space better than others.
Panic attacks?
What's that?
Like panic attacks or?
Kind of. There have been astronauts who have written about it in certain books, so nothing is secret, but it's you think you're going to be able to handle something, and then when you actually get to that certain situation, you go, oh my God, no, oh my God, I didn't realize I was going to freak out and I need to leave here right now. And so I've heard that, you know how some people, when they're on a plane and they flip out and they go like try to open the door,
right,
while the plane is in motion? That may possibly have attempted to happen on the space shuttle.
Oh my God.
But that was in the 80s. Those the folks at the person, I think there was one person that happened to, they don't send up pretty much, I guess you could say, as much of a civilian as possible. They tend not to send those people up anymore. So that was a situation that does not exist anymore. Sending up people with not as much training as you get from a normal astronaut, I guess. So
fascinating. Are astronauts in touch with their families from space?
Oh, absolutely. Email, video calls, all of it. Yes. Audio calls. Yes, for sure. But especially email. There was one time where astronaut John Grunsfeld was up in space, and he happened to be in touch with someone in the Adler's development department while he was up in space, sent them an email. So that was kind of freaky. But yes. Yes, they're
That's
definitely
very
in touch
cool.
with their loved ones for sure.
George would like to know, how are specific scientific experiments selected?
There is an organization called CASIS, and CASIS stands for, it stands for the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space. That is the U.S. national laboratory arm of the space station program, and they handle all of the selection process. So basically, they'll say, "Okay, community, scientific community,
And
you
this
have an
is
idea."
a worldwide ask? I mean, does each
That's a good
country
question. I think,
come up
yeah,
with their own?
I think each country comes up with their own. So I think this is just for, American-based scientists, I think. I'm not 100% certain on that. But anyway, they say, okay, we're going to put out a call for experiments to be done on the International Space Station. Here are the facilities in the Destiny module. Here's what we can handle. Here's the size and weight and shape. And here's the time period. What do you want to do? And the people send in their experiment ideas, and they will go through them all and go, okay, we can do these, we can't do these. And they will select them. They'll build them, send them up. And the astronauts then perform whatever the scientific experiment is. So it basically runs just like any national lab on the ground, except this one happens to be up in space.
Okay. Gary would like to know, how much power is consumed by the space station?
That's a question that I don't know the answer to. Let me.
But didn't you say that they produce more than they use?
They do, but I don't remember what that number is. I'm looking to see if I can find the answer to that. 160 kilowatts. 160,000 watts. So lots and lots of equivalent of 100-watt light bulbs. So 160 kilowatts.
And is that per hour, per day?
That's, I think at any one time, I think that's average. I don't know if that just has to be, I think that's the total amount of power available, I think, at any one time.
Okay. So when they're in their sleeping quarters, can they turn the lights out? And
oh, for sure. Oh, absolutely. Yes. More than likely, at least one person probably has a headset on, or they at least have some way of hearing if there's an alarm or a problem or an emergency communication from the ground. And there's always some noise, air handling, all that kind of stuff. It's never totally quiet. But yeah, they absolutely can turn the lights off for sure.
okay. Susan would like to know, has there ever been research on the possibility of injecting airspace within the human body on Earth in order to achieve spinal relief?
I have no idea. I would suspect not. That might be a little too radical of an idea. Because then where does the air go? Well, yeah, that would be an Earth-based experiment. Now I have no idea. I wouldn't know how you would do that ethically either. I'm not sure.
So I didn't realize that the astronauts became extended after. So is that part of the reason that Scott was not able to like walk off?
That's one reason. Another reason is just muscle and bone loss over the almost year that he was up. So that and when you're back in a gravity environment, when you haven't been in a gravity environment for that long, even a tiny bit of gravity is going to feel like an enormous amount of gravity, and you're just going, I don't want to move. I just want to sit here. You have to get used to that feel of gravity again.
And the compression that happened on his spine, so did that happen immediately? Did it Was it over a
It
period of?
was pretty quick over the course, I think, of a few hours.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So
Yeah,
that,
hours, if not maybe a day or two, but yeah.
and so did they know to anticipate this? That this
Oh
is,
yeah. Oh
this
yeah,
is,
yeah. Yeah, this it has happened to most other astronauts too, but his was probably compounded by the fact that he was away from gravity for so long that you just forget what that gravity environment feels like. So yeah.
are we able to see the space station with the naked eye from Earth?
Absolutely. Yes. So there is a website you can go to called spotthestation.nasa.gov. Spot the station, all one word, spotthestation.nasa.gov. You put in your location, you click the little flag next to your location, and it will tell you when the space station is visible, how high up to look, what direction to look, what time to look, what date. It isn't always visible. There are some time periods where it just doesn't happen. It happens in the middle of the day or the middle of the night when you can't see it. But if it happens near sunrise or sunset, then the website will give the times as to and the directions and all that when
And that's
and the
spot the
duration.
station, spot the station.
Spotthestation.nasa.gov.
Okay, I'll include that in the follow-up. Dorothy would like to know, is the sleep schedule the same for all the crew?
Not necessarily. If there's some experiments that need to happen at a different time cadence, but I believe the clock that they follow is the time in Moscow. Moscow, I think. So they're generally on that clock time. So whatever time it is currently in Moscow is what time they're following on the space station. They have to pick one. So I think
Right,
that's the one that they picked.
would, but is there, because it's a 24-hour operation, so is somebody like manning the looking at things?
Not necessarily. No, not all the time, because you've got a bunch of folks on the ground who can do that too. So
Okay.
you don't need someone staring at a dial at all times up there when you can have someone staring at a dial down on the ground.
That's pretty fascinating.
But
Claire,
occasionally from time to time, if you have got an experiment that needs to run for a longer period of time or something, that might adjust. You might have to adjust when you're up or sleeping.
Claire would like to know, do voices change in space?
No, your voice would sound different if your air was different. And generally the air is basically the same inside the space station as we've got here on the ground. It's basically the same kind of air. So no, your voice, as far as I know, your voice doesn't change.
Has astronaut Scott Kelly, has his body returned to, is he healthy?
Yes, he is healthy for the most part. He's going to be monitored long term to see if there are any long term changes that happen due to spaceflight. What's really amazing is he has a twin brother, Mark Kelly.
Right.
And so what's really great is they can use Mark as the control. So they can compare changes that they see in Scott and look at Mark and see if they see the same changes and go, oh, that's due to normal aging. Versus if they see a change in Scott they don't see in Mark, they can go, oh, that's due to spaceflight. So
yeah, that's very cool.
It's the ultimate science experiment. It's so amazing that both of them were astronauts, and both of them could participate in this way. It's really cool. Really cool.
Does the space station have a telescope?
It's had certain telescope-like instruments, but not anything that you can like I would use a telescope. I don't think it's had anything like that. They have pretty good cameras that they send up from time to time, and they'll take pictures of the ground. That picture from the space station of the Chicago area, that was taken by one of the astronauts looking out the window. But there's certain telescopes for science experiments. I don't think there are any for just general astronaut use, because it's only going to be dark for 45 minutes at a time. you're orbiting the Earth once every 90 minutes. And so you need about 20 to get your eyes adjusted to the dark. And then by that point, you've only got maybe 10 or 20 minutes of usefulness of that telescope then before you got to stop. So I think it's kind of a more practical reason for that, not having one.
From an entertainment perspective, can they download movies and books on their computers?
Yep.
And so they would watch them privately or, with someone else as opposed to like movie night in the.
I'm going to guess that maybe they do have a movie night from time to time. I would think if their work schedules allow it. So they try to eat together from time to time. So I would imagine there's a movie night from time to time. Probably
Okay.
get some of the newer releases. They go, hey NASA, you want to have some astronauts watch a movie? I don't know. Maybe they're watching Encanto right now. I'm not sure. So
Marie asks, is there noise at times? Like all the time?
it's sort of one
Like
of those
being on a plane?
Yeah, it's kind of like not like engine noise. It would be more like the whirring of an air handler or a fan or buttons and beeps and that sort of stuff. Just sort of that low level, just everyday noise that you probably don't even realize is happening. Like right now, my furnace is running, and I only realized right now that as you mentioned noise, the furnace was running. Normally I tune it out. I don't even hear it. So after a while, I'll bet you a lot of that just goes in one ear and out the other.
Sure. Linda asks, what kind of cleaning products are used and are there olfactory issues in space? How politely worded was that question?
Cleaning products, yes. And actually when they do send up a new crew, one of the things that they do is clean the heck out of all the surfaces and stuff, because the station can get a little grimy from time to time. So you got to make sure you do some cleaning every now and then. But also you don't want bacteria and stuff to build up and potentially become even more pathogenic than it is here on Earth. You don't want people coming up to that sort of an environment. So you gotta clean. And I don't know what kind of cleaning products. I don't know what they send up. I would imagine it's a bunch of like wet wipe sort of stuff. I bet you there's a lot of wet wipes being used on the space station. And smells.
I mean, with
just like you get smells from time to time in your house, you get them up there too. So yeah.
But if you haven't showered for 6 months, even if you're sponge bathing, there might be some associated.
It's a gym locker. It's kind of a gym locker room, kind of. There's only so much you can do. So they try to do it they try to clean as much as they can. But after 21 years, there's gonna be a bit of gym locker room factor up there, no matter what you do. So.
Interesting. What's the largest room on board and how many people can be in that space at the same time?
I think the Destiny module is the largest. It's one of the largest. How many people can be in there? Well, everybody could fit in there. There's only 6 or 7 people up there at any one time on the entire station, and they've got all the different modules to go in and out of. So you could put 6 or 7 people in one of the modules and you'd still have a pretty good amount of room. Think of that module as the size of if a school bus was an open tube. It's about that big. So you can fit 6 or 7 people inside a school bus and still have plenty of room left over. So yeah, it's not terrible.
With the people changing constantly, which is, good for just, it's good to mix it up. But is there any one person who's in charge?
Yes, there's always a space station commander. That will rotate between an American and a Russian cosmonaut. I showed you a picture of astronaut Peggy Whitson. She was space station commander for a while. I believe she's the only female astronaut who's been both a space station commander and a space shuttle commander. Peggy Whitson is pretty awesome. And
Are you good till 2:30? I saw you.
yes, I'm good till 2:30. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's always a space station commander. There's always someone in charge.
Okay.
And that role rotates.
Richard asks, well, two questions. Why are your taste buds suppressed in space? And he says, being weightless is sometimes said to feel like falling. If this is true, how do astronauts overcome this feeling, especially when they're trying to sleep?
The second one I'll answer first. You just kind of have to get used to it. You have to kind of take what your visual sensation is giving you versus what your inner ear is telling you, and some of that can be very different. And that's where space sickness comes in, where you just can't handle. It's almost like permanently having vertigo, where you can't reconcile the difference between your eyes and your inner ear. So some astronauts have gotten violently ill for a short period of time because they have to get used to that. I think it's happened a few times. And the first part of the question, remind me, was
taste buds. Why are your taste buds?
We don't know. That's the funny part. We don't exactly know why taste buds don't work exactly the same in space as they do on Earth. It's not just that the fluids redistribute in your body, because right now gravity is pulling on the fluids in your body, pulling fluids downward. And they redistribute, and maybe your face might feel stuffy, kind of like you have a cold, but you don't. But it's because your sinuses, you might get a fluid in your face that you didn't have before. But it's not just that. Taste buds, in some cases, work differently, where stuff tastes different than it does here in space than it does on Earth, where you think you might like strawberries and syrup on Earth, and you get up into space and you go, I don't like how this tastes at all. So that's not the same as you can't taste things as well. That's you can't taste things the same, and we don't totally understand why that happens. That's still kind of a mystery.
Getting back to the health of the astronauts, does the muscle mass recover?
Mostly, not
Okay.
totally. So there's only so much you can do to put that back on. It may not 100% come back when you get back to Earth. And vision changes as well. There are vision changes that happen that may not fully return. So your vision might be a little different when you come back.
And does your sense of smell recover as well?
As far as I know, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sarah asks, how do they handle interpersonal hostility?
You gotta be really good at conflict resolution, because you are stuck with those people for weeks, if not months, if not many months. So NASA and Russia and whoever sends people up, they got to do a really good job with weeding people out who may not be able to handle being up for that long, confined in that space. And you have to know that you could die at any moment. Something could go drastically wrong, or you can't come back if there's a problem. You can't come back easily if there's a problem. So you gotta do as much of that work before you ever go up, and work on, here is how I'm gonna solve a problem with a person that I might have a problem with. And they also select the crews based on how well they work together. So they're not going to send two people up who just don't get along, because that could potentially be dangerous. And so, not just dangerous, science experiment might not happen. It could literally be life or death. And so
we talked about this.
Yeah.
Before the during the tech check, earlier today, and you were talking about how, of course, they have to be great mathematicians and physicists and, have a good, strong science background, but the psychological strength of, not only not being claustrophobic and being able to, live in tight quarters and get along with people, that those are probably as important qualifications as the science.
And the closest I can come up with as a corollary to being on the ground is people who go to Antarctica for 6 months over the winter, who you literally cannot leave if you go to Antarctica in the winter, or possibly submarine sailors,
right?
Where you're not coming up. Yeah, you're not coming up. You might want to see the outside, but you may not see the outside for 6 months, or at least 3 months or something. So, and we also mentioned before when we were doing the tech check that astronauts have found themselves to hallucinate smells, where your brain is telling you, I'm smelling a barbecue right now. I know there's no barbecue here, but I can't smell a barbecue. The smell of freshly cut grass, stuff like that you cannot get that on orbit, and so your brain might make it up for you.
So interesting.
Yeah, and you got to learn how to work your way through it.
In addition to conducting science experiments, they are the science experiments.
They are the science experiment. Yes, when you talk about human medical research, they are the human medical research for the most part.
Do you think they would ever send a pregnant woman to space?
No. Okay. Nope.
Have there ever been health emergencies on the space station?
Aside from the space sickness, which might have delayed a spacewalk or something like that. No, I don't.
What about a toothache?
Nothing I can think of.
Okay. But they're prepared to handle. I mean, if somebody,
because most of the crews are not medical professionals, and so they need to be trained to handle as much of the medical issues as possible. But also, they do have doctors on the ground that could talk them through problems. And if there was something that really was life or death, there is usually a spacecraft that is at the ready that they could figure out some way to get them back.
So if somebody had like appendicitis,
yeah, that would. I don't know how they would do that.
It has to be something they've trained for.
That would require surgery, and I don't know how you could get someone back in time, because what if the space station isn't on a side of the planet where you could get people down to the ground where they could be picked up in a timely manner and taken immediately to a facility?
Just, hypothesizing, if there was a doctor on board, say there was a surgeon on board and something happened, could you conduct an operation? No, you couldn't, because of things floating around.
Yeah, things floating around. They wouldn't have the facilities, you wouldn't have the equipment, you wouldn't have the anesthetic, none of it. You just got to make sure you're sending up very healthy people.
Right.
Now, the Apollo 13 mission, they did have some medical issues there, but it wasn't anything life or death, but it was kidney issues, that stuff related to not being able to drink enough water, that sort of stuff. So that sort of stuff has happened for sure.
Recently, the Russians blew up the satellite that was no longer working. The pieces endangered the space station. Why was that allowed to happen?
Russians can blow up whatever they want. Chinese can blow up whatever they want. The United States can blow up whatever we want. We've done it too. So I'm not saying it's right. None of it is right. But
is space debris a big concern?
Yes, very much. because the debris is traveling at 18,000 miles an hour in orbit with you, or coming up from a lower orbit, or traveling in a different direction, or something. And even a small piece of debris can punch a hole into something important. And so space debris is definitely a problem, and it's getting to be a bigger problem because more and more stuff is being sent up, not just by NASA, but all those little satellites going up, and everything. Every time something is sent up, little pieces fall off. And so paint flecks, bolts, nuts, the occasional tool that might get lost off the side of the space station. That's happened before. So yeah, it definitely happens, and it's a lot of it falls out of orbit quickly, but some of it may get left up for a longer period of time, and it's definitely something that we need to be aware of.
And are there lots of people on the ground at NASA tracking that, or in other places around the world?
The U.S. military tracks it, but it's only down to a certain size. There's only so big of a piece that you can see using radar and other means on orbit. So anything down to like little tiny paint flecks, you can't see that. There's a limit. I don't remember what the limit is, but there's a lower limit to the size of something that you can track. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of space debris being tracked, which means there are many more times that amount of pieces that we can't track.
Is there a cosmic radiation issue?
Yes. So the radiation from space is a problem. There's definitely shielding on the station. So I should say radiation from space is a problem if you're not shielded. If you're shielded, it's okay. We've had people up literally for the past 21 years. The sun has done its thing from time to time. We've had radiation from space that happens all the time. But there's only so much radiation that an astronaut can be exposed to over their lifetime of going up in space before NASA says you can no longer go up into space. So there is a limit, but no one has died because of space radiation.
There've been a couple questions, and I brought this up to you earlier. Has there been any romance in space?
Not that I know of. Of course, you hear rumors over the decades, but I would tend to doubt that it would happen, mainly because you are literally so close to that person. It'd be like a family member more than a romantic interest. So I would think that tends to not happen, because this person is probably closer to you than your brother or your sister, and that would be kind of really weird. And so
it would completely change the dynamic of the group.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen. Now, have there been relationships between astronauts who have not gone up together into space? Yes, absolutely. But like I said, I've heard rumors, but I've heard nothing confirmed, and I would be kind of surprised if it actually happened.
So with freezers on board, can they have like real ice cream as opposed to dehydrated ice cream?
Dehydrated ice cream has never flown in space.
Interesting.
Astronaut ice cream is not a thing. Astronaut ice cream is a sales and marketing tool. If you've ever eaten that stuff, the first thing you will notice as soon as you take it out of the package is it crumbles like you wouldn't believe. You do not want crumbly bits flying all over the space station. There has been actual ice cream sent to space, and it's usually sent in the freezer. So yes, real ice cream has flown. Freeze-dried ice cream has never flown in space.
Okay. Are there all space stations still in orbit?
No, I don't think so. I think everything has come down. I'm almost certain. They're definitely defunct satellites and things, but I don't think any of that
And there was no one
space
aboard
station
the one
debris is
that
still out there.
crashed in Australia.
No, 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 not at all. No.
Okay. Near the end. Have you ever been inside a spacecraft?
No, I've been inside like a simulated space station module, but nothing that was ever destined to fly in space. The closest I got was when I worked at Space Camp in Florida. One of the Mercury capsules or spacecraft is there, and they would have to open it from time to time to clean the inside. And so I was there when they had to clean it, but I didn't get in it. No, it's a museum piece, so that would be bad if any of that happened. But no, I've never been inside a real spacecraft.
And last question, do they recirculate the air?
Yes. Yes. And actually it's they have to bring up air from time to time, because every time they go out to do a spacewalk, you jettison some of the air that's in the airlock out. And also you use up air as part of the air you breathe inside your spacesuit. And so they have to send up the components of air from time to time. It's not an inexhaustible resource. So, but they do recirculate it for sure. And so they can send air through essentially a scrubber system to take the carbon dioxide out, but they definitely recirculate it for sure. Yes.
This is so fascinating. It is just mind-boggling to me that this is up there.
Yeah, I hope folks get to see it. Go to spotthestation.nasa.gov and look to see when it's gonna fly past next. And
I wanted to ask you about the telescope that docked yesterday.
The James Webb Space Telescope got to its orbital location yesterday. So it is now in orbit around the sun. And it is located a little less than 1 million miles outward from Earth. And it successfully got to where it's going. It is successfully sorry, let's see, I've got hair. Successfully unfurled itself. So over the next 3 months, they're going to turn on the science instruments and focus the mirrors. They need this. They need images from the science instruments to help focus the mirrors. And so, but it takes a long time to be able to do all that. So that, and they have to get the structure cooled off to about somewhere around 390 below. And it currently is at, hang on, I'll let you know what the current temperature of the James Webb Space Telescope cold side is. Give me just a second, and I'll let you know. It is currently the coldest part where they have a sensor where they're showing what the temperature is. They have more sensors than I have access to, but 347 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Still got another 40 or so degrees to go for that thing to cool off, and it's going to take a while for that to happen. But yeah, very exciting.
And you'll be well, not you personally, but scientists will be receiving images that the telescope.
Yep. So they'll start to get the first. They'll release the first public images probably sometime in maybe June, maybe July. So it's going to take that long to get the rest of the steps done. So yeah, but so far so good. It's very exciting.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
Michele, thank you so much. This was so interesting. You're just such a great presenter, and it was such an interesting topic. I mean, we could sit here another hour with, other questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything, but it was so fascinating.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Well, this is a fun topic, and what's really great is it connects to our everyday lives as well. Not just the research that's being done, but people want to know, do you do stuff up there like you do them down here? And the short answer to that is yes. And so,
and we didn't
yeah.
even talk about the thousands of people at NASA who make all this possible, because, you know, as you said, you know, we think the public has sort of gotten used to it, but you can't let your guard down when you work at NASA. And
Nope, literal lives are on the line. And so they all know that, but they do their best to make it look easy, and it's never easy.
so a big credit to those folks.
For sure. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone. And
good luck going back to work.
Thanks.
I know that's going to really encroach on your availability for speaking.
Definitely.
So yeah. I feel very lucky that we've been able to have you here 4 times. So thank you so much.
It's been fun. We may be able to do it occasionally here or there. So I'll never say never, but it's going to be fun going back and actually seeing some of my colleagues who I have not seen in person in almost 2 years. So it's going to be crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. People, in 2 weeks, we will be having a wonderful presentation and a historical impersonation of Frederick Douglass. So please join us. Thanks, Michelle. Take care, everyone. Bye.